go. So the title of this presentation is How to Make a Gem of a Gem. My name is Justin. You may know it. That's my email address, and you can find me on the internet by my last name, Searls, on Twitter and GitHub and LinkedIn and Ruby Gems. I have so far written 39 Ruby Gems over the years, and my goal today is just to share some lessons that I've learned over time. And in fact, I've already lied to you. I've actually written 40 Ruby Gems, but one of the ones I'm going to talk about today I haven't announced yet, so stay tuned. And I've lied again because we've written 41 Ruby Gems, because one of them we're going to do on stage together right now, and we're going to release it live. So that's right. Today you become a Ruby Gem maintainer if you're here in this room or if you're watching on video, because I just made that up. And the goal of this presentation today is we're going to answer two questions. One, the first talk is really how do I make a gem? And then the second question is how do I make it good? And we're going to talk about both those things. And it's just not as hard as it might look if you've never written a Ruby gem before. So part one, how do I make a gem? This might have turned on. So the right way to make a gem is using bundler here. Bundler comes with a great command called bundle gem, and you can just type in the gem name that you have after the fact. And here I'm creating a gem called board. And so it's kind of like an interactive fiction. It kind of sets up like a text adventure saying, hey, do you want to generate tests? And you can pick out your test framework. So I'm here using Minitest. Do you want to have a continuous integration set up for your gem? And so you can choose between all these different options. And I like to use GitHub Actions lately. It's very fast. It's all your code is in one place. It's easy to use. And then it asks, do you want to license it as open source using MIT? Most gems are licensed MIT. So yeah, let's do that. Do you want to have a code of conduct in the gems that you generate? Here's what a code of conduct is and how to enforce it. Yes or no? Sure, let's have it. And do you want a change log? This is a text file that tells you at each version what changed in your gem. You can read about it at Olivier's awesome site, keepachangelog.com. Yes or no? Yeah, I want to have a change log. And then do you want to add a code linter and formatter? So your options here are RubyConf and standard. This is the first thing I ever contributed to Bundler, is this feature. I was excited to do it because we maintain standard at testable, so I'm going to use standard. And then it initializes a Git repo here. And then the next thing I do is I just run git commit bundle gem board. Whenever I generate a new file, a new project, I like to commit it right away, so that way anything that I change I know is something I did. So let's go ahead and commit it. All right, so we did it. We created the new gem. So let's run bundle install. And there's these warnings, now an error is saying that the gem spec is invalid because there's all these to-dos in there. So we don't actually have a working gem yet. So let's pop into the gem spec. And when we do, we can zoom in and you can see there's all these sort of to-do items. We just have to work through each of those. So we're going to write a description. We don't need that second description. We're going to put in the home page as just the GitHub page. We don't need that thing. We can set that, and we can set the source code URL and then the changelog URL. And now we've gotten all these to-dos done, so we can commit that we fixed the gem spec. And there we go. We can run bundle install again, and that's now going to bundle and install everything cleanly. So that's great. So now we can run rake, and that's going to run our tests and lint. And you can see that the test failed, and here's the default test board. We're going to pop into that file here, and you can see it's got this second test, it's just test to make sure that it's doing something. We'll just throw that away, because I just want to get to a passing build as fast as possible. Great, so now we're passing. A great way to make your build pass is to delete the tests. So we did it. We made a gem that does nothing. Congratulations. Well, what this gem is going to do is it's going to call this free API called the board API. So we're going to write a quick test. So a test that it just returns an activity. The public API is just going to be board.now. We're just going to assert that this gives us some kind of object that kind of has all these same properties like price and description and that stuff on it. Run rake again, and now we're going to see that that fails because there's no board.now method on that module. And this is not a test-driven development talk, so I'm not going to ping-pong back and forth and show every single step. We're just going to dive in and write all this code. This is a generated file that comes with the gem. It says your code goes here, so let's just follow instructions and wipe away that comment, and then we're going to write a module method called now, and we're going to use net HTTP, pass it the domain and a path, and then we're going to wrap that in a call to json.parse, and so we're going to take that string, turn it into a JSON-y hash, and then we're going to create a new custom object called an activity, and we're going to translate that JSON into a normal Ruby-ish object. Now activity needs to exist too, so we're going to define that class by using struct, and then we're going to create all these different property types, and here turn on keyword initialization because it makes it a little bit easier to use. And then last but not least, we got to go require those two things that we use. So we got to require NetHTTP and JSON, and those are both part of standard lib, so we don't actually have to require any additional gems or anything. So we zoom way out, and this is our whole first gem implementation. Hopefully it passes the test. Okay, cool. And so now we're passing, and now we're ready to go. We can ship it. So we're going to go ahead and just update the version. So by default, it gives you 0.1.0, but I'm a big fan of lowering expectations. So I always start at 0.0.1. Then I run bundle, which is going to update the gemfile.lock, and so that won't cause any git churn. Then I change the changelog, and I say, okay, so like update the version here, and say, you know, what is in this version, just this one method. All right, so I can commit version 0.0.1. Then I run rake-t. Rake-t is a cool command that gives you all of the rake tasks that are defined. So I'm going to run them here and see, oh, I've got this cool rake release. It's kind of like does everything. It makes sure you're all bundled. It generates the gem. It packages it up. It pushes all the git commit and creates a git tag. And then it finally releases it to Ruby gems all in one go. Real simple, easy to use. So we're going to run rake release here. And then it's asking for my MFA code from Ruby gems because I got 2FA set up. So here's the code. And then boom, push to Ruby gems. So we did it. So this gem is really up on Ruby gems. That means you're a gem author now. And so you're also responsible for the maintenance of this gem. And whenever I push up a new gem, I always like look up at the GitHub site, and I just revel in my work. And I zoom in, and I wait for it, and then boom, it happened. Our first issue. So somebody's got a complaint, and it's my partner Todd. And he's like, you know, this doesn't make any sense as an API. It makes a lot more sense as a command line interface. Like maybe we should have like a message of the day pop up and tell you what to do instead of be on your computer. And so how do you write a command line interface? Actually, like the bundler gem tools and the rake tasks make this pretty easy. There's just some additional kind of plumbing, and it looks arcane, so let's like walk through it. So we're going to pop back into the gem spec again, and if you look here, this spec.files thing is essentially just you shelling out to Git to like look for all of the files that are tracked by Git. And then there's we specify where our binaries live in the exe folder. And then we go and grab all those executables, those things tracked by Git. Again, we're just focused on the plumbing here, and we can see that the exe directory doesn't exist yet. So we're going to make it, we're going to touch a file, we're going to make it executable, and then we're going to go and start writing this little script. So I need a shebang here to say, like, hey, I'm writing Ruby code. The load path stuff is normally handled for us by Ruby gems, but because we're inside the gem, we actually have to manually load that lib directory, which will allow us to require that board file. And then this doesn't exist yet, but I know I want some sort of like CLI object. I'm going to pass it argv, which is the argument vector. That's all of the kind of command line parameters that people might type, and then call run. None of this exists, but I just want to kind of get this down on paper. And then I'm going to actually commit it now, even though it's like a work in progress, because like I want to actually see that when I run rake install, which is going to package up the gem and then install it locally, that I should be able to run the board command. So when I run board, I am elated to see this error message because it shows that it's actually successfully running my script. And so I've got all the plumbing stuff worked out, and the next step is to actually make it work. So the first thing we got to do is go back into our lib board, which is kind of the entry point for our gem. We're just going to require relative that board CLI thing. Again, this file doesn't exist, so we got to go make it. Then we're going to go create the CLI class, and as an initializer here, we're going to pass it that arg vector and put it on an ivar. And then it turned out we don't really need it, so it's kind of future-proofing. Because all we're going to do in our initial implementation here is just call board.now and then puts the description to the command line. All right, so now we can run it locally. You don't have to install it to actually test it. We're going to run it here, and it says learn woodworking. All right, cool. So step 3 is cut a new release. Got to stay on task. So we're going to update the version number now from 0.0.1 to 0.0.2, and then we're going to run bundle again. That'll update our gemfile.lock. And then we've got a change log here, so we got to add, yeah, there we go, create a new section, and then we added the board CLI. And then I like to do all this sort of like versioning ceremony in one nice commit so they're all tied together and the stage is clear. So I can run rake release, give it my MFA code, and now I've pushed up 0.0.2 up to Ruby gem. So this is awesome. If you go on your computer later today, you can gem install board, and our gem is there, and you can run board, and it'll give you something to do. So we did it. That's all. You've seen everything. I elided no detail. You made a gem. Yay! All right, so let's all go make gems. In addition to this, if you're interested in playing around with this and kind of dipping your toe in the water, I created a whole bunch of issues here, like filters on the API or options on the command line interface. And you can read them here. And if you're interested, just open up a pull request and give it a try. And we're going to grade on a curve. Like, this isn't about excellence. This is about just like getting some reps in and learning how to contribute to a gem. So if you want to take a stab at that, do it. And I'd love to help you out, and we can collaborate. Okay, now for the second part of the talk, like how do we make gems good? If you've ever bought a diamond, you might have heard of a thing called the 4 C's of gemstone quality. So we're going to talk about each of those today with our Ruby gems. They're clarity, color, carat, and cut. And so we're going to start by talking about clarity. And this is a story for people who find it hard to focus in a crowded code base, like myself. I've got this Rails application called Kame-Same. It's a Japanese learning tool. I can search for words in it like hapyo, which means presentation, what we're doing right now. And I can read about that, or I can go and actually add it to my reviews and do little quizzes and learn the word. But if I search for a word like Ruby, it's actually not there, because initially when I built this thing, I had a very small dictionary, just 2,000 characters and 8,000 words, and I wanted to make that bigger. So I looked online, and there's this kanji dic and this JM dic. These are open source Japanese English dictionaries. Thing is that they're in XML, which means I wanted to build something in Ruby that would take that XML, run it through some Ruby, and then it'd give me Ruby objects that I could insert into my database. And what it would allow me to do is go from 2,000 characters to 10,000, and from 8,000 words to 200,000. And it seemed like a pretty big win. Now, I'm operating in the context of a monolith, and I love Rails, and I love working in a monolith because everything's right at hand, and I can kind of keep it all in my head at once. But it has the downside, too, if we visualize the monolith. I've got all the user management stuff and the quiz module and keeping track of people's progress. I've got the whole React JavaScript front end. I've got the search capability, and I have to mentally kind of carve out space for this new dictionary import to come in, and it feels constraining, and I have a bad habit of making kind of short-term, naive design decisions when I feel kind of claustrophobic. So I just pulled in Nokogiri, make a new class, and I take a path, and I open up that XML document all into memory all at once, and then I use XPath, and I grab the entries, and I loop over them, and I kind of cherry pick the parts of each word that I want, and then I upsert those all into my item table, and I take a stab at this, and I run it here. And when I ran it, it took over 12 minutes to run, because I was literally paging out. It was just way too much memory. And I knew what the problem was, but I'm thinking, and I'm overwhelmed by all the complexity around me, and I just couldn't really get in the right headspace. And so sometimes it's nice to just blow it all away and start in a brand new folder and start a brand new thing. So I created a new gem called AWA. AWA stands for English Japanese, so it's kind of dictionary adjacent meaning. And so what it allowed me to do mentally is push all that other stuff aside and just focus on the dictionary stuff. And this allowed me to think hey, actually what makes the most sense here is to do a streaming Sax XML parser, which you can do with Nokogiri, but not very many people had done before. And it also gave me plenty of time to get the entity mapping right and create a good object model for this. Would be useful not just for me, but for others. And then a streaming public API that was going to be garbage collection friendly, so it didn't chew up so much memory. So I blew away my original Nokogiri implementation and imported AWA. And it looks pretty similar. You still say I'm parsing this file, and I have these entries. I'm shoveling on these hashes, and then finally upserting the items again. When I run it now, it was way faster. It was 9 seconds, right? So it's a huge gain, and now when I go and I use Kame-Same, I can search for things like Ruby and get a whole bunch of results back. And so it is, I think, an underappreciated benefit of breaking out and starting a new thing, pure function, none of the incidental dependencies onto your big monolithic app. Just go and start a new folder or a new gem and dedicate some space for some mental clarity. The next thing I want to talk about is the color of our gems. And this is a story for anyone who makes rash decisions when emotions are running high, like me. I think of it sort of like a pain chart from here to here, where at one end of the spectrum you're not mad, at the other end of the spectrum you're real mad. But where I do my best work is right in the middle, in care mad mode. And I've got a long relationship with RubyConf. It's a linter and formatter for Ruby. And honestly, I didn't really use it for years because I don't care about linters and formatters, and I just don't care about programming language stuff or abstract syntax trees or parsing. It's just everyone's got a thing, it's just not my thing. But I did see a lot of teams over the years have pointless debates about we should have this rule or that rule, and then passive-aggressively changing the rules and unrelated pull requests back and forth forever. And it's just not a great way to live. And then I saw some teams even, where they'd be a tech lead or somebody would sort of use it as an authoritarian means of control to control how other people did their work, whether it's really strict metrics or whatever, and that really, I hate to see it. So I got mad enough at RubyConf that what I wanted RubyConf to be was an unconfigurable tool, just take all those arguments and get them out of there and just have everyone be able to focus on the work, what really matters. And so I very brashly decided the solution to this was I was going to fork RubyConf. So I literally made a fork. I called it RubyConf. In hindsight, it's weird that I changed the Rubo part of that name. But I went through, I moved it, I did a lot of find and replace, and I made a huge big git diff. I was furiously typing because I was mad at RubyConf. And so like, temper is cooled, and now I'm in Carat mode, this is where I like to be, right? So I'm like starting to work on this unconfigurable configuration and just picking out all of what I think are the best rules. But like before I'd even gotten halfway through it, boom, there's like a major RubyConf release. And I look away again, and there's another one, and another one, and another one. Turns out a lot of people, unlike me, really like linters and formatters and contributing to them, and it's a super actively maintained, pretty sophisticated project. And I realized I was always going to be outpaced. So, since I made RubyConf, if you look through, like there's all these RubyConf releases that I would theoretically have to pull from upstream and then do all this renaming and decisions, and it's 106 releases. There was no way I was ever going to keep up. And so instead of getting to focus on the thing I wanted to do, which is like eliminate stupid arguments, I was over here in this place where like, oh, I own a linter now. This is great. Like, so I don't want to spend my life maintaining a linter, so I just quit and I stopped. And that's why you haven't heard of RubyConf. So it's there, but don't use it. I like to design evergreen problems and things to work on that I just find mildly irritating or antagonistic because it keeps me motivated, it keeps me focused, and it's just my happy place productively. And so if I think about like how do I maximize the time that I spend in Carat mode, it was again just like let's limit these pointless debates and let the architecture follow that. So I created a new gem called standard, and what standard does is it truly depends on RubyConf. It uses RubyConf, but it doesn't use its CLI. Instead, it creates its own CLI that just happens to not be configurable. And then that way, like you eliminate all of the kind of pointless debates, and you prevent even the real authoritarian and controlling stuff from even happening. And if you don't like a particular style, instead of changing the configuration, you just go to standards repo and you create a new issue, and then we can have it out and talk about it together and decide whether or not to change it for everybody. Because the idea is, instead of your team having a bike shed and then all these other teams having their own bike shed and everyone having the same nothing fights over and over again separately, and then you having to learn every other team's, like standards goal is to be one big gigantic community bike shed, and we can just have it all out in one place, and we can have kind of more portability between projects. And so if you opt into the standard lifestyle, as I encourage you to do, like life is just a lot easier and better and fun. But I have also, I'm a RubyConf customer now. Instead of getting mad at it, like I've really come to respect the amount of work that Bozdar and Koichi and all these people do. It's a super sophisticated project, and I have an appreciation for them now. So all that to say, like, don't let your priors, color your thinking, like your biases. Like, you might want to fork a thing or build a competitor to a thing, but like there might be a way to be more interoperable or even contribute back to the thing that you're mad about. All right, so next up, let's talk about Carat, or the size of the weight of our gems. This is a story for people who find it hard to say no, like me. So back in 2011, I was like getting mad at my computer. I was like, why is it so hard to test JavaScript in Rails? And me and Corey Flanagan, we sat in a coffee shop. We started this gem called Jasmine Rails. And it's what I call like a glue gem. So it's just like kind of connects these two things together. What Jasmine did, if you're not familiar, it's a spec-like syntax for writing tests. So you can write a test like this and had a little HTML runner that looks like that. And so Jasmine was just providing, just that test DSL in JavaScript and just a little tiny reporter API tell you how many tests were passing and failing. And then the Rails side, what we were relying on here was Rails 3.1 had just released, which was the first time, thanks to the asset pipeline and sprockets, that you could have like an engine include a bunch of like JavaScript and CSS assets and stuff. And so we were like, this is great. This is going to enable us to build this gem. Now, if you dislike the asset pipeline and sprockets now, you should have tried it when 3.1 came out. Lots of performance regressions. It came in really hot, lots of breaking changes. It was a very challenging time. So this thing depended on sprockets from Rails and Rake and ERB. And then like the work in the middle was the glue code, right? Because it's a glue gem. And so what we did here was we had to have a custom Rails engine that could host that runner. We had a Phantom.js installer, so you could run it from the command line in a fake environment. And then a whole CLI, because Jasmine didn't have a CLI, for like formatting all these results appropriately for your CI system. And it just did too many jobs, all of them poorly. It was pretty slapdash. And whenever that happens, because like it just has a lot of responsibilities, you're gonna get a lot of pull requests. So we got a lot of pull requests, and I kind of just like merged them all because I assumed like surely other people will help me maintain this if they contributed features, and that turned out to be a false assumption. And also I just didn't have a lot of good tests around everything, and so I didn't realize that I was kind of just like hoovering in like a lot of complexity. But I just like said, yeah, and let's pull it in, like make it the best we can do. I've never had a really popular gem before. But what I learned is you got to be really careful. There's configuration where you're like change where a path comes from, and then there's configuration like it changes the mode that you're operating in, like turn on and off features. And so there's like a lot of different optional features in this gem now. And maybe in my app I only use one of them, and maybe in the thing that runs on CI it actually uses none of them. But like if somebody's angry about a particular issue and they open up like a new bug request, like maybe they've got these 3 flags turned on and they're interacting in some way that I didn't anticipate and I didn't test for, because like it's a combinatorial math problem. It's like if you've got 7 optional modes and they can all interact with each other, that's 2 to the 7th power, or like 128 different configurations of your gem. You got to test all those if you want it to work. And so anytime we got one more pull request, marginally it might look like, oh, this is just one more little true-false flag. But in fact, like if it's the 8th thing, now we're at 2 to the 8th, and now we got 256 modes. So you're really, really careful about configurability like this. New options like not only make it more confusing and harder to maintain, but harder to test and be assured about. Like every time I changed anything in this gem for years, I felt like, oh, it's probably going to break somebody else. And eventually I just grew to resent it and I stopped working on it. So we had 67 people contribute to the gem, but at the end of the day, I was the only one accountable if it broke. And because I'd pulled in so much of other people's code that I didn't read, like no one understood how it all worked. And so last week, I just merged the final PR to this gem to say that it's no longer maintained. And so now all that's changed here is no one's accountable if it breaks, so don't use that gem. So 9 years later, I had a new MacBook, but the same problem. Why is it so hard to test JavaScript in Rails? I learned some lessons this time, and I created a new gem called Cypress Rails. This is also a glue gem, and it connects Cypress, which is like a web testing tool in JavaScript with Rails, and it's got a test API, it's got a runner, it's got a great CLI. It brings more to the table. And on the Rails side, I just use kind of more hardened pieces: Rake, Railties, Action Pack. And the glue's responsibility here is much less. Here, I'm just responsible for like kicking off a new test server, sort of like your system tests do. I roll back transactions between tests, so there's like a little like route that you can hit to say like, hey, I want to isolate the data between these tests that you can do. And then there was a super class that we wrote for a mini test where you could inherit from that and then like run Rails test, and it would include your Cypress test along with your system test cases and stuff. But it turned out that in practice, that was really slow and kludgy because Cypress didn't know about it. It didn't work with all the extensions. And I could just tell it was not going to be something I would use. So I had a tough choice to make. I had to choose between remove the feature and potentially make somebody mad, or continue supporting that feature in perpetuity for fear, even though it's not very good, mostly out of fear that like somebody might get mad if I removed it. But the Jasmine Rails experience had taught me, like the right thing to do is just to get rid of it. Now, if you publish a gem and it doesn't have a particular option, no one's going to know to thank you that your gem doesn't do this unnecessary thing, but like you need to have your own backbone and kind of stand up and be a bit of a vanguard for complexity creep. So now there's only 2 modes, right, in that gem, and it makes testing really easy. I've got a test app for transactional mode, I've got a test app for non-transactional mode, and so I can be really assured that like whenever I release something, as long as the test passes, it's probably going to be okay. So yeah, the lesson there is just don't let complexity, whether it's complexity of like you feeling like you got to do everything, or other people telling you got to do everything, a bunch of pull requests, like weigh down your gem, because like the last thing you want is 5 years from now hating the thing that you created. So last but not least, we're going to talk about the cut of your gem. And this is a story for anyone who doesn't take feedback particularly well, like me. So Test Double, our company, it's an allusion to the name Test Double, which is like a like it to be a stunt double in your tests, any fake thing that stands in for a real thing when you're testing. Now, most mocking libraries, a mocking library creates test doubles, it's one and the same effectively. Most mocking libraries, their APIs kind of make it real, like they're focused on like how do I take real things and sort of poke holes in them like Swiss cheese. And what they really do is they facilitate testing of hard to test code, is essentially how most people use mocking libraries. But my preferred kind of mocking library, same kind of tool set, but like totally different framing. It's like paint by numbers. Like how do I help facilitate writing easy to use code that just happens to be via tests? So it's a way different mental model, and the way that I kind of got into this mode was in the late aughts from a great Java jar called Mockito. And I kind of ported it in 2010, a spiritual successor, for Ruby with a gem called Gimme. And so I made it in my spare time, because I had a job, it was kind of constraining, a little bit stuffy at the time. And so I was using Gimme to have fun. So I got to play with like a lot of Ruby metaprogramming, that was fun. Instead of doing unit tests, I did executable requirements with Cucumber, and so like all of the documentation was executable. I thought that was cool. Some clever inheritance going on, but mostly I was just like having a good time. But I was really proud of the API. I knew that the API was good. I knew it was an improvement over anything else available in Ruby. I still use it. And Jim Weirich, who was a Ruby hero of mine, unfortunately he's no longer with us, but he wrote Rake. He was an early contributor to Ruby gems. Great person. He also had a gem called FlexMock, which was a mocking library. I saw him at a conference, and I pitched Gimme to him. I was like, check this out. This is really great. And I was really nervous, and I waited, and he said, it's interesting. He was like very positive. He was also a really positive guy, but I was super heartened. I was really excited by that. And then later on that year, he sent me a pull request to Gimme. So he was like using Gimme, and I was like, oh my God, my life is over. This is the best. Like my hero is using my thing. And it was just really exciting. So then I saw this tweet when he said, hey, he was like dismayed by the use of Cucumber instead of unit tests and stuff. And I was like, that sounds like something I did. And then I looked at the date, and then I looked at this date, and I was like, oh God, my hero just subtweeted me. And it was really demoralizing. And the worst part, of course, is that Jim was absolutely right. Because I would start to get issues like, hey, here's a bug from Jason, and I'd try to like pull back the covers and work on it and realize that when all I had were these integration tests, I didn't have unit tests that were actually forcing me to write well-factored code, and it was just a big yarn ball, and it was changing one thing here would break something over here. So it was like the right idea, it was the right API, but it was just the wrong execution. I didn't do my best work to implement it well and to be maintainable. So I just gave up for 10 years. That's one solution to the problem. Until today, because breaking news, I've got a new gem to announce. It's called Mocktail, and it's something I built over the summer because like I've decided the gems can have sequels. So it's a totally fresh start. It's the same kind of API, but this one like I just decided to code it good instead. You can check it out online. We're not going to go into the API and stuff today, but it's called Mocktail. Hopefully it's well documented. We're going to release some screencasts and stuff over the next month and a half. But same kind of deal. I've got a day job, which is more flexible now, and I spent time thinking hard about the API over years, really, building prototypes and throwing them away. I strived to get 100% code coverage, so I'd be sure it all worked. Lots of small, well-named classes, so I could be sure that I'd be able to maintain it. And I was feeling really good about it. And then I had a lot of thread safety issues, so then I fixed those, but I was a little less happy because I don't like dealing with multi-threading stuff. But overall, big picture, I had been proud to make Gimme, but I was super proud to share Mocktail because I really believe in this and I think it's going to work over the long term. And more than just pride, I know future me is going to thank me because it's going to be more maintainable. And because I've got a really great test suite, if Ruby changes under me or any dependencies break, I'll have a better chance of fixing those quickly. It's also more inclusive. If somebody wants to work on this gem later, they'll just be able to clone it and then run bundle and run rake and really quickly get up and running. It's not going to be arcane. And it's exemplary in the sense of it's a good example of my work. I'm pushing up my best work to GitHub so I can share this is how I like to code, right? And not a lot of us have a lot of portfolio work. So if you've taken the time to write a gem, it might be a good time to kind of show off what you know and how you like to write code. So over the years, even though I don't want to discourage anyone from just playing around and programming for fun, if you do plan on maintaining something for a few years, I've never regretted taking the time to measure twice and cut once. So that was a little bit about the 4 Cs. And I hope that you take this talk and take some energy today and think about maybe there's a gem that you could create or contribute to. And if you do create something, I would love to hear from you. Or even if you have any trouble or issues, reach out to me by email or DM me or tweet. If you got any feedback about the talk or you'd like to share it with somebody else, we'll be sharing a video real soon. And I'd love to hear from you. But last but not least, before I close and go away, I just want to share real quick, this is a very special RubyConf because this is actually the 10-year anniversary this year of my very first Ruby conference. I spoke at Rocky Mountain Ruby in 2011, just down the street in Boulder, and a guy named Marty Haught was organizing, and he took a chance on me, and he's also director at Ruby Central today and organizing today, and I got to speak alongside heroes like Jim, and it really changed my life. This is actually after Jim subtweeted me. But I took it in stride, and it was just a great experience, and my life has been transformed. That's actually me. Oddly enough, that talk was about Jasmine and the Jasmine Rails gem I just told you not to use. Time marches on. We all learn lessons. And that's not all. It's also the 10-year anniversary, actually next week, of the founding of our company, TestDouble. And that's really exciting. I can't believe it's been 10 years. Hell of a run. So, we just started as 2 people working at like mostly medium and small companies, but now we're almost 100 consultants. A lot of you in the room have worked with or at or are working at TestDouble or with TestDouble, and it makes me like so happy that we get to work with so many cool people. And we're at clients now like GitHub and Zendesk and Betterment and Gusto, just working with some of my favorite companies and products, and just really awesome teams. And it's been a wild ride, and I'm super grateful. If you are share our mission of like wanting to like improve how the world writes software, you can learn more about like being a consultant at careers.testdouble.com. And if you're like at work and you're doing something ambitious, or you could use some additional help, or you're maybe like got some legacy rescue, or like wanting to learn some new skills, our service is primarily to just join your team and help you out and get stuff done alongside you. And you can learn more at services.testdouble.com, or just send that link to your boss. And last but not least, like really, I just want to slow down for a second, pause, and really say thank you, because like my life has transformed over the last 10 years, and it's all thanks to the Ruby community. Like TestDouble would not be the company that it is today without all of you and being able to engage and meet people. Some of like my favorite like lifelong relationships and friends I've met in this community, and the fact that I still get to go up here and yammer on at you is just, I'm tremendously happy to be here today. I'm really, really grateful, and I want to thank you all personally for your time today. So thanks.